Welcome, everybody. I'm very happy to see you all here. My name is John Hollica. For those that don't know me, I'm a professor of visual arts here at USD, and I'm one of the members of the coalition that has been organizing this teaching. But I want to start our event by acknowledging that I stand as a grateful guest on the land of the Kumeyaay Nation, and that wherever we live or visit on this continent, we humbly recognize that we are guests on the native lands of sovereign nations. I also acknowledge that as an immigrant to this land, I'm the beneficiary of a long and cruel history of settler colonial violence, land theft, and dehumanization that continues to impact the native people of this continent. And as a Palestinian American who struggles against the colonization of my ancestral lands, I am deeply troubled by the irony of also being a settler on other people's native lands. I seek the guidance and the wisdom of our indigenous sisters and brothers in being a caring steward of this land. So welcome, everybody. This is the first event in the fall 2024 teach-in on Palestine. Our teach-in has been organized. Our coalition has expanded. Instead of just being faculty and alumni from USD, now we're faculty, alumni, and students from 5 campuses in Southern California: USD, SDSU, UCSD, Cal State San Bernardino, Cal State San Marcos, and very soon Mesa College as well will be joining us. So we are expanding and we're working together to help provide our communities with a series of educational events from multiple academic and cultural perspective. And our aim is to provide space or create space for complex learning, for honest reflection, respectful dialogue that will encourage us all to think critically about our relationships to what is happening in Palestine. So this is the beginning of the second year of this teaching. And I wish that the urgency to prepare and present these educational events had subsided. But the atrocities that are being inflicted on Palestinian civilians continue in Gaza and are rapidly spreading in the West Bank and have the potential of developing into a catastrophic regional, if not global, war. So the urgency continues. And I want to thank my colleagues who are part of the organizing coalition for their persistence in their support of justice in Palestine and their unwavering effort to educate our communities about the 76-year history of war on Palestine. I also want to thank the University of San Diego for providing the physical and intellectual space for us to learn. So I hope that you will join us for all of the events. They're going to be offered here at San Diego State University and at UC San Bernardino. And I'm not going to go in detail about them. I just want you to be aware of this outline. And there's a poster that's being designed much nicer than my very rough design that will be emailed out hopefully by middle of next week. So I'm just going to go very briefly through the events. Tonight's event will be introduced by Dr. Farid Abdel. I'm not going to talk much about that, but the title of the event is International Aid to Palestine. And the next event that's coming up will be at Cal State University San Bernardino. It'll be on, my eyes are going bad, folks. It will be on, I have to hold this close, on September 24th at Cal State. And the title is Imagination in Times of Crisis, and it will feature a lecture by Mr. Ahmed Nabil, who's the founder and director of the Fiction Council in Jerusalem. That event will be broadcast live, I hope, as we're trying to do with this one. This is the first time we are live streaming our events, and we are grateful for Cal State for providing their technology and their wonderful assistant Thin to help us get this going. The third event, excuse me, will be here at USD, and it will involve Palestinian American students from USD and UCSD who will tell stories about their identity and their histories. And that will take place at our Humanities Center on September 26th. The following event after that will be a conversation between Nathan Thrall and Dr. Jonathan Groutbart at San Diego State University. And Nathan Thrall is the author of an amazing book called A Day in the Life of Abdel Suleiman. And if you haven't read the book, I would very strongly recommend that you read it. It's a portrait of a very complicated and layered reality in Palestine. And that will be on October 8th at San Diego State. After that, we come back to USD and we'll feature a lecture by Miko Pellet, an activist and author, and he'll be talking about a year of unprecedented violence in Palestine and Israel. And that will be on October the 9th, a Wednesday. The following event is not a lecture, but an amazing cultural event that's being organized by Professor Antonietta Mercado, and it will be an altar for social justice, an altar, a memorial for the fallen, and it will be a Day of the Dead memorial that will happen here on campus at Student Life Pavilion, and that will start on October 28th and run through November 1st. Our seventh event will be here also in this room. It'll be a lecture by two people, a couple who will work together regularly, Dr. Laura Sheehy and Dr. Stephen Sheehy. Laura is a psychologist and Stephen is a social scientist, and their lecture will be titled Resistance Keeps Us Sane, Rejecting Settler Colonial Reality Bending, and that'll be on October 30th in this room. That will be followed by a panel discussion that will explore the art of survival and resistance, and it will feature three points of view on this process of using art as a form of cultural survival. One of the panels will be Dr. Susan Green, an American artist and psychologist who has a very long history of working in Palestine on public art projects, and she'll be talking about a project that she's developing in occupied Jerusalem. Another speaker will be Ms. Lydia Balahutrek, a Ukrainian and American artist and educator, and she'll be talking about a project that she's developed about the Holocaust in Ukraine in 1932 and 33. And then the third speaker will be Ms. Candace Hopkins, who's a member of the Karkas Tagish First Nation, and she's the executive director and chief curator of Forge Project, which is a native-led cultural and arts organization in upstate New York. So they'll be joining us, and they'll have a lot to say, and I hope you'll be here. The following event, our ninth event of the fall, will be lectures by Dr. Jonathan Groutbart and Dr. Latha Vara Darjan at San Diego State University, and they'll discuss the possibilities or the process of international law holding Israel accountable for what it is doing in Palestine. And then we have two more events after that. One of them, the 10th, will be Reverend Dr. Mitri Raheb, who's a Palestinian priest and educator and the founder and director of Dar Kelima University in Bethlehem. And he'll be coming here in person to speak to us about his book, 2023 book, titled Decolonizing Palestine, the Land, the People, and the Bible. And that will take place on November 21st in this room as well. And then our very final presentation will be a final project presentation by students in Professor Ted Falk's History of Palestine and Israel class. I don't know exactly where that will take place, but it will be happening soon. And we have two of those students here, and they just found out about it, right? So you're going live. And now I just want to first thank you again for being here. And I want to introduce Dr. Farid Abdel. Farid is a professor of political science at San Diego State University. Until recently, he was the chair of the Department of Political Science. And he's a member of our organizing coalition. And I'm very grateful for his willingness to come here and speak. And he will introduce the speakers. So let me just take this down. Okay.
Good evening. Thank you, John. Thank you all for being here, both in person and in the webinar setting. The topic of this evening's panel, International Aid to Palestine, Responses to the Current Catastrophe and a 76-year History of Imposed Calamities, calls for a bit of an explanation. At least the second part of it does. I'm assuming that all of you are aware of what the term current catastrophe refers to here. It refers to what has been unfolding in front of us in Gaza in the last 11 some months. Of every 100 people who lived in Gaza a year ago, Israel by now has directly killed more than 2. That is, without counting all the people it has killed indirectly by depriving them of food, clean water, and adequate medical care. Even if Israel were to stop the killing now, which it does not seem to be poised to do, it is estimated that when the numbers of dead are added up to include the indirect killings, Israel will have exterminated close to 10% of the population of Gaza. I'm hoping that in light of this, you will not need an explanation for why there is a dire need for international aid to Palestine today. But you may need a bit of a refresher about what is meant by a 76-year history of imposed calamities. I will take a few minutes to bring you up to speed so that you have a sense of what this refers to. Here it goes. Europe has long had a serious problem of racism that at the turn of the 20th century was evident in 2 ways: internal and external. Internally, European racism was evident in the treatment of Europe's Jewish populations. Externally, Europe's racism was evident in the treatment of peoples across the globe that European countries colonized. In 1917, Britain had geopolitical reasons for wanting to control Palestine. That is the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. The population of that land at the time was about 90% Muslim and Christian and about 10% Jewish. That year, the 2 forms of European racism converged on an idea that had been in the air for some time, but that had not been adopted as policy by any state prior to that year, 1917. That idea was to call for the establishment of a Jewish homeland or state in Palestine to which Europe's Jews would go, thus de facto resolving Europe's internal racism problem. This, it was thought, would be done by having European Jews colonize Palestine and somehow getting the Palestinian Muslims and Christians off the land, who as inferiors, it was assumed, did not really matter. This harebrained idea, in which internal and external European racism converged, was considered by many to be suspect and did not have broad support. But after the Holocaust, things changed, and this started to seem like a really good idea to many Europeans and Americans. Having murdered or having let be murdered 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, a desperation and a psychological crisis set in among large numbers of Europeans and Americans to do something to expiate for that unforgivable wrong that stained their consciences. Many dealt with this by adopting the idea of helping establish a Jewish state in Palestine against the wishes and interests of the overwhelming majority of its people. Seen from a European and American perspective, the idea was so convenient, so self-serving, that it blinded its supporters to the fundamentally racist impulse of seeking to expiate for your European crimes by harming non-Europeans. In 1947, the newly founded United Nations got involved and made a disastrous proposal to partition the country that triggered a civil war, followed by an international war in 1948. The upshot is that Palestine was destroyed. It ceased to exist as a political entity. And on 78% of the land, the new state of Israel was formed. 80% of the Palestinians who lived in the land that became that state were expelled or fled for their lives, becoming the people we call today Palestine refugees. Immediately, Israel barred them from coming home. The hostilities ended, ceasefire agreements were signed, the United Nations called on Israel to let the Palestinian refugees go back to their homes, but all that was to no avail. Every year, it was hoped that the conflict would be resolved. Diplomatic activity started very soon after 1948 to resolve the conflict. The point was that the status and future of the refugees would be finalized and determined on the basis of how the conflict is resolved. 2 decades passed and the conflict remained unresolved. In 1967, Israel occupied the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, taking over all that had remained of Palestine, causing yet another wave of refugees. And there it stays until today as the sole power controlling every inch of the land of historic Palestine, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, presiding over a system of apartheid over a population that at this time is about half Jewish and half Palestinian. Israel, having achieved military victory, has never been in a hurry to resolve the conflict. But Palestinians have been living in something like suspended animation for 76 years. They are in a sort of limbo, if you will, waiting in suspense for the conflict that destroyed their society, their lives, and stole the future of their children to be resolved. For over 30 years, a so-called peace process dragged on, leaving the conflict unresolved. For Israel and its allies, resolving the conflict is optional. Without resolution, Israel can just sit on what it got by force and keep going. For Palestinians, the absence of a resolution to the conflict is a calamity that gets compounded every day that the conflict is not resolved, piling calamity upon calamity. The deferral of justice is itself an added injustice. It is in the context of this situation of an unconscionable, continued deferral of resolving the conflict that international aid to Palestine fits in over the last 76 years. The situation in which Palestinian refugees find themselves until today in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, make them perpetually vulnerable and puts them at the brink of humanitarian disaster any moment, were it not for international aid. This is where the work of UNRWA fits in, and the work of smaller non-governmental organizations and organizations of civil society like ANERA fits in. Our 2 guests this evening will talk about the work of their respective organizations. When they are done, we will engage in a bit of a discussion that I'm happy to moderate. Our first guest is Mr. Hani Al-Madhoun, Director of Philanthropy for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA-US. After Mr. Al-Madhoun speaks, we will be joined by Mr. Suleiman Mleahat, who is Director of Educational Programming in the West Bank, Gaza, and Gaza for American Near East Refugee Aid, ANERA. That's the name of his organization. So now I'd like to ask Mr. Hani Madhoun to speak, and then we will proceed with Mr. Suleiman's presentation. Thank you, Hani.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. A bit late where I am in Virginia, but I also know Suleiman is early morning in Palestine. So good to be with all of you. My name is Hani Al-Madhoun. I work as the Senior Director of Philanthropy at UNRWA-USA. UNRWA-USA is a US affiliated organization. It's independent of UNRWA, the agency. So UNRWA is the agency that does the work in 5 field areas. I work with UNRWA-USA. The role I focus on is fundraising, but also storytelling and building awareness about the work of this wonderful agency. We've talked about Palestine refugees already. We've talked about a lot of those topics, but I wanted to share that, when you think about Palestine refugees, I'm one of those folks. That's why I am a refugee. It's because my grandfather and grandmother were ethnically cleansed or evacuated from historic Palestine, our ancestral town called Asqalan. In Hebrew, they call it Ashkelon. It's about 20 kilometers north of Gaza. So my grandfather left when they were threatened. He left a chicken in the oven cooking, thinking he's going to come back the next day to dine on it. And about 3 years ago, he passed away, and he's never tasted that chicken, and he was never allowed to go back to that place where our ancestors came from. He died in Gaza, Palestine refugees, and that's sort of like the connections, right? And my father used to teach for UNRWA and all that stuff. So let's zoom out a little bit and talk about UNRWA. That's the UN agency that's designated and dedicated for the Palestine refugees. There is at least 2 UN agencies that work with refugees. You may be familiar with the name UNHCR. That's the Higher Commission on Refugees. It's an agency that works with all refugees, but not the Palestinians. So that's where it becomes, they work with Syrians, Afghans, Rohingya, all those communities. UNRWA actually predates UNHCR. So UNRWA started 2 months prior to UNHCR. And it was created after the Nakba of 1948 because of the 750,000 Palestine refugees who were created or who were made refugees, made homeless because of the Israeli expansion and military and Israeli war of some may call independence. So what happened is UNRWA was established by a UN resolution in 1949 around December to provide immediate relief, that's food and basic medical aid. And then as the situation persisted, it was expanded to do an education and job creation. So remember, UNRWA was created by a UN mandate at the General Assembly. So you may have a new president next year. They cannot just, change that. It's the General Assembly that makes those, declares the mandate. UNRWA works in 5 field areas and only 5 field areas. That's Gaza, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. If a Palestine refugee, say there is a cluster of Palestine refugees in Iraq, UNRWA was not in Iraq. Right now in Gaza, we're looking at 100,000 Palestinians who were able to flee Gaza. Those are in Egypt. UNRWA cannot provide assistance to those folks. In theory, UNHCR should be providing assistance to those refugees, but the host government has to agree. And as we know, the Egyptians have not allowed UNHCR to register Palestine refugees. That's a missed opportunity. You could ask me about that. So the agency right now, UNRWA, has about 30,000 staff in Gaza. So you're thinking, this is a huge organization. It is, because now we're looking at the 6 million Palestine refugees between Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan. That's basically Jordan has the most number of Palestine refugees, followed by the West Bank, Gaza, then Lebanon and Syria. And what does UNRWA do? It's a UN agency that provides the basic care. It's a de facto government inside some of those refugee camps. So you have the school, primary education, those are the blue color UN flag. You have healthcare, basic healthcare provided for folks who are refugees, food assistance, that's a big component of that. And remember, UNRWA is unique in this field and separate than any other UN agency. It's the only agency at the UN where 99% of the staff are refugees themselves. They're providing those services. There is really very few expats at UNRWA. You may know all the expats because they're usually in TV or given. So now if you look at Gaza, Scott Anderson is the director of UNRWA's emergency response in Gaza. He's the number one person in Gaza, and he's actually a veteran of the U.S. Army. So this is the UNRWA tells people the only connection to an army group is the U.S. government, because the Scott Anderson used to serve in the U.S. Army, and a guy who speaks, I think he's from South Carolina or something like that. So there's a few of those. The point is, you go to other UN agencies, you're not going to find refugees doing the work themselves. And that's really the middle class now in Palestine. And the UN, the UNRWA staff. My father used to be an UNRWA teacher. They're paid a little bit more than the public sector teacher, because they want to afford to pick and choose top candidates, and they want to make sure they get the best of the best. So those are the situation there. Then you have the healthy clinics. Right now in Gaza, UNRWA became the largest provider of healthcare. That's because the hospitals are out of commission, and everybody just, UNRWA has some surviving buildings that are still operational. Because if you remember, 70% of UNRWA's infrastructure got damaged inside Gaza. Not an accident. You can't bomb the building 5 times and say it's an accident. Just that happened 10 days ago when a Nusayrat school was killed, including 6 UNRWA staff were killed, which brings the total of UN casualties 220, which is the highest in anywhere in the UN history. This number of UN flag-wearing staff were targeted and killed by Israel. And again, just I want to remind people, you hear allegations and misinformations about that. Just because Israel say it, it doesn't make it true. Remember, there is evidence. UNRWA showed that it takes evidence. They take the neutrality seriously. So the guideline is for anybody who works for UNRWA. They cannot sympathize, they cannot have any connection to a military wing. They could have political opinions. Nobody's going to take that away. But that's what the Israeli story now. They're really coming after UNRWA. And luckily, the story is not sticking as they had hoped. And I say this because if you remember in late January, a lot of those allegations against UNRWA staff, a lot of agencies defunded the organization. 17 countries defunded UNRWA. 16 of those have come back already. Guess which country still has not come through? The US. And the US gives like a third of UNRWA's budget. You're talking about $400 million a year. That's not coming anymore. And that's going to create a problem for the agency. We knew that the previous administration had defunded UNRWA, but right now, the Biden administration restored it early on, and then now they took it back. That really disrupts the services that happen with UNRWA. If you talk about it now, UNRWA not only is the largest humanitarian actor inside Gaza, 60% of the aid that comes into Gaza comes through UNRWA, and there is a UN cluster where UNRWA is in the driver's seat. Why UNRWA is able to do this and not the World Food Program? Think about this. The World Food Program has maybe 100 staff in Gaza. UNRWA has 13,000 staff. The logistics, the fleet, the warehouses, and the UN Secretary General bragged about this to the world. He said Every time UNRWA brings a food truck into Gaza, or the World Food Program bring the same food truck, UNRWA's price is always a third of that. These agencies, that's a combination for the history. They know the product, they know the community, they know how to source well, but also they don't rely on too many expats. So you got local people who work, who make a decent living, but they're not having to put their kids in fancy schools and get airplane tickets to go visit the homeland. So this is sort of UNRWA. We raise UNRWA, but we also get a lot of hate against UNRWA, and I get that. It's the agency that's the most visible. It's the agency that the right wing in the Israeli government does not like, and here's why. They have themselves convinced that if you disappear UNRWA, then the Palestine right of return no longer applies or exists, meaning I just told you I'm from this historic Palestinian town. They think if we say UNRWA was gone, then that's it. We're not going to be ever thinking about the right of return, which is compounded now by the situation in Gaza that comes to play into why families like mine refuse to leave north of Gaza and paid dearly for this decision because they knew if you're asked to go from a place, they're not coming back to it. And a year later, the folks who went to the south have not been even allowed to go back to the north again to their homes, and they're being even bombed more intensely. The north is struggling with famine. My family is living through that, but there is a lot of things that are not being done in Gaza right now, like the delivery of water. There is shortage of that. There is overcrowded conditions. You've heard about the polio case. So there is a lot of those things that we're trying to highlight. There is a million, think about this, a million displaced Palestinians who are living around 300 buildings for UNRWA, either inside, like a medical training, a vocational training center, like in Khan Yunis, or a school that has 12,000 sheltering people that were attacked in Nusayrat, or the other school, or the health clinic, or the training, or the warehouse. And that causes issues where the delivery of aid is not happening. One of the things that happened is the Israelis were bombing the police because they say the police is the party they don't like, right? But the problem is that created conditions of chaos because you bomb the warehouses for UNRWA, you kill the police, the food truck shows up. Where is it going to go? The warehouse is not going to be there anymore, right? The police is not going to come. People are desperate and starved, literally starved. My family lives next to Kamal Adwan Hospital. That's where the malnourished kids go. And that's where at least 3 dozen of those kids died from malnourishment. This has not babies. This has nothing to do with the political equation or we hate this guy or this is about the erasure of the Palestinian people. Palestinian men are not disposable. My brother Majid, 42 years old, he was killed in November in an Israeli airstrike with American bombs. He's a full-time civilian asleep at 5:50 a.m., 5:30 a.m. and him and his family, 4 kids, his wife, 6 people, and cruelty, trauma over trauma because we couldn't recover the bodies. It took us about a week to get the bodies out because there is no machinery was allowed to operate. There is no fuel. And you can imagine a grieving mom sitting to guard the body of the child. Her child is dead. She knows she's grieving, but also she does not want the dogs to come near the body. So, we've done a lot of things. I'd love to tell you more about the soup. Am I good on time?
Take the time you need.
So when the family felt around in December, we had a video of a family of my family member. My sister was trying to bake some bread from animal feed because the Israeli authorities were not allowing flour to North Gaza. And she said the product smelled so bad, even the cat wouldn't come near the food. And my mom, she had to eat some of this because she had to take her diabetes medication. So the family came together and started a soup kitchen for the community. And we're not chefs. We don't cook. We're just regular people. my brother Mahmoud, who's a few weeks prior, if you remember, in December, about December 7th, the Israeli had arrested a lot of Palestinian men and paraded them like animal circus in their boxers. And they said these people are bad militant actors and all that. And maybe I believe it, right? But then I was looking at the video and I'm like, whoa, this is my brother. I knew instantly this is garbage because I knew my brother Mahmoud. He's not even physically fit to go, walk for 10 minutes. So we've made us think about that. We've received some media attention, and a day later he was released, despite the fact they dubbed him a militant and somebody that, so a lot of missing Palestinians have not come back. We know family members who are married into our family who have not been. We don't know if they're dead or alive. There's too many unknown dead Palestinians, and there's secret prisons. You've seen these videos of violations. So to just wrap it up, the family started a soup kitchen in North Gaza and started to feed 120 family the first day. And then people showed up to our house the next day asking for food. Then, as Palestinians, we started really rallying a global community to make sure the kitchen happens and serving soup. There is no rice, right? So they would forage. Speaking of aid, UNRWA was delivering things to the south, but they couldn't deliver. And I worked for UNRWA. This is the largest humanitarian actor, and my mom didn't have food. Can you imagine? And we're raising millions, and I can't even help my own family. So we came up with a way to forage. In Arabic, they have, when it rains, they have something called khubbeza and a few other items that are common, mallow and things like that, persimmon. So we chop these up, make a stew or a soup, and just give people. And we were surprised that a lot of people rallied around the kitchen, and it grew into serving up to 800 families a day. And that's sort of like the disruption of the humanitarian aid, which I liken it to a train, right? So UNRWA and ANERA and all these guys were like a train. And when the Israelis wanted to attack Gaza, they took the train track. And then the train is still there, but where do we go? I mean by that, they shut down the telecommunication. They took away the banks and the ATMs. They bombed them. That's it. There is no solution. That's why we had to go back to the basics and work with our family and neighbors to provide meals for our people. As we did this, we've seen that it's a beautiful distraction from the pain and the agony and the trauma everybody deals with. I'll stop there, and I would be happy to add later in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hani. Now, I'll ask Mr. Suleiman Mleahat if he would tell us a little bit about the work and his work with his organization, ANERA. Suleiman.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. Good morning from Amman, actually. I'm just crossed over from Ramallah, and it's rather early this morning, but I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you, John. Thank you, Farid, and thank you to the University of San Diego for an opportunity to talk about our work and our response in Gaza. My name is Suleiman Mleahat, and I'm normally the Education Program Director for ANERA, but have engaged almost fully in our response in Gaza. I have a presentation which I'd like to share with you, if I may. Okay. Okay. ANERA is a small to medium-sized NGO, non-governmental organization, established by a group of students and young folks in 1968 to provide immediate relief for refugees who were made refugees as a result of the Six-Day War in Palestine. We work primarily in three organizations, mainly in Palestine, but also in Lebanon and Jordan. And we implement quite innovative programs in health, education, and economic development, including agriculture. And we also work to support infrastructural development of health clinics, water networks, and I manage the early childhood development program. So we have become quite renowned for focusing on early childhood development and building kindergartens, developing curricula, training teachers, etc. And last year, we spent $150 million. In Gaza, we opened an office in 1984. We work in all 5 governorates. We provide water and sanitation programs, agriculture, education, medicine, and livelihoods. And by livelihoods, I mean we support a number of community-based initiatives to support women. We set up rooftop gardens. We provide support for farmers to set up greenhouses, etc. And we've been an implementing partner of USAID for over 40 years. And I'm going to save you the history lesson, but essentially Gaza is made up of, the population of over 2 million is made up of 80% refugees, mainly in 8 refugee camps. And I wanted to include this slide because the irony is often is not seen that the current genocide and the war in Gaza involves refugees who've been made refugees once or twice before, mainly from the 1948 war, which created the state of Israel and essentially dispossessed the Palestinians of their homes. And the fact that the majority of the people in Gaza are refugees and have been displaced, mostly have been displaced, adds insult to injury. And this, for me, is a stain on the human conscience. Prior to the war, so we've been blighted by a vicious occupation in the West Bank and Gaza since 1967. And things have been quite awful for nearly 17, 18 years now. And the people of Gaza had experienced 5 wars prior to the current genocide and war. In 2008-9, the war lasted 22 days. In 2012, it was for 8 days. And in 2014, it lasted 51 days. And again in 2021 and 22. So many children who've grown up in Gaza have known nothing but a series of horrific events in their lives. And as specialists in childhood, we know how detrimental that can be. The toxic stress can have enormous impacts for an entire lifetime. So prior to the war, on the eve of the war, Gaza's population reached more than 2 million people. 80% were refugees. Unemployment was nearly 50% amongst the adult population, much higher for younger people. 2/3 of Gaza's population lived below the poverty line, and about 80% were food dependent, so food insecure. The water situation is pretty catastrophic, and with the UN stating that actually it was likely to be unlivable in a number of years. Hunger, anemia, and stunting among children was the norm. You know, given my work, I work with mainly under 5s. We know that 50% prior to the war had suffered iron deficiency anemia. Stunting, which is the irreversible physical and cognitive damage, was prevalent in 38% of some of the children in some communities in Gaza. And hence why agencies such as ANERA, agencies such as UNRWA and the role of UNRWA and its food aid program was critical in maintaining people's survival in the Gaza Strip. So briefly, since October 2023, and sadly this changes every day, I realized that my figure of 41,252 people who've been killed has increased to 41,295 only yesterday. This includes 16,500 children, and only recently the UK's medical journal, The Lancet, estimated that indirectly, the figures for people being killed or who have died as a result of the war is closer to 200,000 people, 186,000 to be precise. Almost 100,000 people have been injured, more than 100 people, more than 10,000 people are missing. 625,000 students are out of school because much of the school infrastructure has been destroyed or seriously damaged. 1.8 million people have been displaced. The infrastructure, health infrastructure, roads, education, academic institutions, universities have been severely damaged or destroyed. And there's a severe lack of food, proper access to water, healthcare, leading to hunger, starvation, and disease. So, I remember waking up early in that fateful day in October last year, and together with my colleagues, we were able to develop a response, because ANERA is primarily a local organization with its headquarters in Washington, but there's always been a policy to employ local staff in Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine, and that played in our favor in the sense that our colleagues were able to move rather quickly, providing food in terms of ready-to-eat parcels, fresh produce, and cooked meals. So in the past 11 months, we've provided nearly 40 million meals, we've brought in nearly 1,000 truckloads of aid. We've provided nearly 7 million medical treatments, almost 30,000 blankets, 3,000 tents, 8,000 mattresses, 40,000 hygiene kits, and nearly 60,000 menstrual packs. And we are currently running health clinics for chronic diseases and wound management. And I personally manage the psychosocial sessions, and we provide psychosocial support, recreational activities, informal education classes for children. I do want to stop just here and provide you with a short film, if I may. And okay. Just bear with me one moment. Okay. They say every picture tells 1,000 words, so let me just show you. This is slightly out of date, but it pretty much covers our program. And I think in talking about aid, I think it's important that you have some idea about how we've responded and the context in which we're working.
The audio isn't working for us, Suleiman.
Sorry, Farid?
We're not hearing the audio. Did you intend for us to hear the audio?
Yes, of course. And yes, it should be with you. It should. I can hear it here. So let me. Yes, of course. Just bear with me one moment. Let's try.
You have to enable sound on Zoom. You share your sound.
Oh, okay. So you can hear me but not hear. Okay, John, I sent it to you, knowing full well that we may. Okay. I very rarely use Zoom, so apologies. Okay.
Can you copy the link to the chat and I can play it on my side?
Brilliant. Okay, just bear with me one moment.
And then can put it up for you if you send him the link through the chat.
Yeah, okay. Just bear with me one moment, please. Okay. It's there, John.
The people of Gaza are enduring a humanitarian catastrophe, a direct result of the present brutal war marked by its horrifying and indiscriminate nature. More than 32,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed, tens of thousands have been injured, and more than 85% of the population have been displaced by forced evacuations and the destruction of entire neighborhoods. Everyone in Gaza now faces an uncertain future. ANERA's dedicated Gaza team, made up of our staff, volunteers, local partners, vendors, and suppliers, has surged in numbers. With approximately 450 individuals working on the ground, ANERA is delivering humanitarian aid in Gaza every day, despite shortages of all kinds, bombed roads, communications blackouts, and electricity cuts. Our commitment to life-saving interventions isn't just rhetoric, it's evident in our response. More than 22 million meals served, tens of thousands of hygiene kits distributed, millions of medical treatments delivered, and psychosocial support activities for displaced children and their families in shelters. In the midst of a collapsing healthcare system, ANERA is hosting free healthcare days with medical staff and medicines near shelters. During the war's onset, ANERA's Gaza staff secured food and supplies from trusted local vendors amid a complete siege. Now our staff supports community kitchens in Rafah, Khan Yunis, Gaza's middle area, and Jabalia in the north, stocking them with ingredients, cooking supplies, and operational gear brought in with the trickle of humanitarian aid. Tens of thousands of hut meals are served daily at these community kitchens. Leveraging our established network of Gaza farmers cultivated over the years, ANERA also delivers fresh produce to displaced families, enabling them to prepare meals. On the healthcare front, ANERA's medical donations team has significantly expanded humanitarian efforts for Gaza, instituting a network of medical aid cargo flights from Jordan to Egypt for delivery into Gaza. Despite all these efforts, enormous challenges persist. Gaza families are now struggling to fend off starvation. Fuel and drinking water are virtually depleted. Overcrowded shelters spread respiratory infections, diarrhea, and hepatitis A. And only some 100 trucks per day, 1/5 of the pre-war average, are allowed into Gaza, hindering aid and relief efforts. ANERA has been able to bring in trucks with food, medical supplies, and clothing, and we are working to get many more. We will continue to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. But in this moment, with you, we must strive to save as many lives as possible, so individuals can share their stories, pursue justice, initiate the healing process, and ultimately contribute to the reconstruction of a stronger and more resilient Gaza.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you, Suleiman, and thank
Okay, well, just wrapping up. Sorry, Farid. Thank you, if I may. Okay.
Please take your time.
Okay. So it hasn't been plain sailing, to say the least. It's been one of the most complex. I've been working in international development for 30 years. The past 11, 12 months have been the most difficult I've had to endure, not just having to witness the carnage and the mayhem in Gaza. I have many colleagues and friends who've lost tens of their family members, and I'm sorry, Hani, sorry for your loss also, Hani. One of my colleagues, Suad, who partners with us on the education and health program in Gaza, woke up one morning to find 14 members of her family dead, who had been killed in a bombing. So delivering aid is quite problematic, and the one main reason we can talk about the Egyptian bureaucracy, lack of warehouses, complexities with the security and the threats of bombs, etc. But essentially, Gaza has been an open-end prison since 1967. And when Hamas were elected in 2005, and who became governors of the Strip in 2007, it became hermetically sealed. So Israel controls everything in terms of what goes in, and that hasn't changed during the war. In fact, it's become more severe. So Israeli restrictions in where aid can come in and how it can come in is the biggest obstacle to ensuring people have access to aid. So safety and security issues and bombings and lootings is something my colleagues face and others in the humanitarian community. I was speaking to a colleague from one of the Gaza partner organizations, Unlimited Friends Association, who are based in Egypt, and he was checking on their supplies in El Arish, and he told me that there was something like 3,000 trucks full of now food waste, essentially. There are major issues with the bombings in terms of storage. There's critical lack of fuel, which means we're unable to distribute the food. And communication has been a major problem for the best part of 11 months. We're proud to have worked with ANERA, with UNRWA. We work closely with the World Food Programme and many, many other donors and agencies across the globe. But fundamentally, there are only two ways in at the moment, in Zakim in the north and Kerem Shalom in the south. The trickle of aid is problematic from Kerem Shalom because of the current conflict and fighting in Rafah, and the Zakim crossing in the north of Gaza has limited capacity to bring in, and of course there are restrictions that impede our humanitarian effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suleiman. Now we'll open it up for some questions. My understanding is that the people in the room can have a piece of paper to write their question on. Sean in the front will distribute them. And those on Zoom know how to submit their questions on Zoom. So let me quickly maybe ask a technical question about the nature of the coordination. The question is mainly for Suleiman. Like, how does ANERA coordinate with UNRWA? I mean, is the idea that you try to serve populations that UNRWA is not allowed to serve? Or like, what is the nature of the coordination? Just a little bit more.
We serve all the population in Gaza. Our efforts initially were in the south because we could not move or we could not function in the north. So we support many shelters, and we know, and Hani can tell us that most of the UNRWA schools have been turned into shelters. And initially, we were able to cook hot meals and distribute those to, often, we provide almost 100,000 meals per day, and we provide UNRWA and many other partners with foodstuffs and other support. So we coordinate with ANERA, UNRWA, but we also support many thousands of other displaced people. And the key thing, Farid, is the coordination. The coordination is not, it's the easiest perhaps inside Gaza with our counterparts, including the World Food Programme, UNRWA and others, but also local agencies. But the key issue is to coordinate with Israelis, with an agency called COGAT, the Coordination of Governmental Activities in the Territories. So, I mean, it's a loaded name, but essentially the Israeli Army's coordination unit for everything that happens in the West Bank and in Gaza especially. So we have to work closely with such agencies to ensure that we're able to bring the food in. But we've worked in partnership, even though we're a small to medium-sized agency. We've gone beyond the call of duty in that sense, and we've punched above our weight as an agency because of the local capacity. We have over 100 staff at the moment delivering these programs in Gaza.
That actually helps clarify and leads me to a question for Hani. Given Israel's hostility towards UNRWA, how does that coordination work for UNRWA if now, with the Rafah crossing closed, the only access points are through these Israeli entrances? What is the nature of the negotiation that takes place? What kind of pushback do you get? What kind of access are you getting right now?
Not a lot. Not a lot of aid is getting in, not enough humanitarian aid. So Suleiman is absolutely correct about the points. Since Rafah is taken out of commission in May, it became harder to get the supplies that are needed. One of the biggest news that happened in North Gaza is when ANERA got some meat into North Gaza just a few weeks ago, and that was took 2 months. It's from the Eid, when Muslims do the sacrifice and all that. Took 2 months to get the meat to North Gaza, and I was surprised my siblings cooked with it, and it was in all the news. The next day, everybody's like, "Look, there is meat," and that's sort of like gives you an idea of how silly this is. My family had not had eggs in since maybe like 10 months. Some people have been eating out of a can, and that causes a lot of health issues. So what UNRWA was doing right now, and by the way, I worked at ANERA before, so sometimes we use these names. UNRWA does work after the Israelis start picking on UNRWA. The Israelis speak from both sides of the mouth about UNRWA. For domestic politics, they're saying one thing, but in private, they're doing another. They also do this when they report to the US. I give you an example where it becomes an issue. A couple of tricks they play is they will go and tell the US government, "Hey, we've given UNRWA 10 times permission to go to the north." That sounds good. In reality, it's not just the permission, it's actually led the mission to go to deliver the aid. So that causes, maybe one time out of those 10, and that truck got into the north of Gaza. Many times it was bombed, not just UNRWA, by the way. ANERA lost a staff, their colleague Musa, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike, knowing his location as well. Then the same thing with UNRWA and a lot of agencies. World Food Program got attacked just probably last month. And the World Central Kitchen, I have different opinions about those guys, but they definitely lost a lot of staff there in Gaza. But at the end of the day, UNRWA works with a UN cluster because the Israelis may not want to talk to UNRWA alone. So UNRWA works with the World Food Program, UNICEF, There is a smaller shop that's been really talking, UN shop, UNFPA, the Population Fund, that's been doing a lot of talking about Gaza. These UN agencies, and I call them out in this, they're a little bit like they talk about Gaza, it's like a natural disaster. Like, oh, we need to feed people, but they do not talk about the stuff that's happening in Gaza, you know? So I called them out in this. The World Food Program delivers a lot of aid, but again, they don't have the staff or the capacity, so they may deliver it and then UNRWA would distribute it. One more finer point about the question asked to Suleiman early on. So obviously, everybody in Gaza has a need. Even if you were a 1%er in Gaza before the war, you still need some help. And remember, even before October 7th, 55% of the population of Gaza were in food assistance. Don't imagine that Gaza was this nice oasis and all that. You know, it was definitely nicer than now. But things were being delayed, you know, like you had, 60% unemployment rate among the youth. So there was a lot of problems that folks wouldn't recognize. The final point I want to share is UNRWA when this started. So 70% of the people of Gaza are refugees. So those will be always covered under UNRWA. When this war happened, another community got added to UNRWA's mandate, which is anybody who is not a refugee and they changed their place of residence, meaning you are originally from the town of Beit Lahia, you're never a refugee, but because of the evacuation orders, you moved to Al Bureij. Then you qualify to receive UNRWA's assistance. The folks say in Khan Yunis who never left their homes and they're not refugees, those other agencies like UNRWA will say work with this community. And it's much easier for UNRWA to deliver aid at the shelter because you can control it. You cannot guarantee the safety of Suleiman will tell you aid will disappear. Armed gangs will show up and you don't know who's shooting. Stuff will get looted. I'll stop there.
One more little question. Given the extreme need in Gaza and all the resources that have to go to Gaza, how is that affecting the operations of your organizations in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in Jordan, Lebanon? Is that taking resources away from other places? How is this working out? Because the refugees in these other places still have needs, right?
Yeah, the biggest soft spot, honestly, for me is the Palestine refugees in Lebanon. That's always seemed to be underfunded. Those folks have discrimination in employment and healthcare services. So if you ask me before October 7th, where should you donate your $1,000, I would always say the Palestine refugees in Lebanon. But the West Bank is not in a much better place, especially areas like Jenin and Tulkarem, where we've seen similar images to Gaza comparable. Now, the need is greatest in Gaza, but also there is still a school that still need to teach. You have to pay salaries. You have to take the trash out in some of those camps. So it is being overshadowed. But the reality is the need, like for food assistance, like if you look at the West Bank, maybe there's like 50,000 people benefit in the entire West Bank from the food assistance because things might look better and only like marginalized communities, say in an area between Khalil and Beit Lahem. So there is definitely a competition for resources, but at the end of the day is, there is never enough money for UNRWA, at least because the US took away those funds. And a lot of that is just causing disruption and causing issues where just like a quick thing would be like, instead of hiring a teacher, it would be like, hey, you work you're on a contract or a daily labor, and you can't have really like a sustainable method to do this to maintain the services or the quality. Suleiman.
The irony is that this war and the carnage in Gaza has actually engendered a tremendous amount of goodwill, and people have responded in kind. So we've actually seen a massive increase in donations. We've had something like 80,000 new supporters. People feel very passionate and committed to the plight of innocent people. So, and we know that this is manufactured in the war, and the consequences of the war are purposeful. So there are many pockets of deprivation in the West Bank, because the war also meant that Palestinians could no longer access their fields, they could not access employment opportunities in Israel. And as you well know, there were hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the West Bank and to some extent in Gaza, who were able to access basic employment opportunities in agriculture and the construction industry. So that those opportunities cease. So we see a lot of people who are going hungry or who have no access, who've become more dependent on food aid. But as well as engendering support for Palestinian refugees, we've also had people tell us, both individually and in institutions, that they wish to continue and expand their operations in the West Bank because of the carnage that's happening in Jenin and Tul Karim and Kalkilia and Tubas. And we've seen over recent weeks a deliberate escalation of the conflict, which is really predetermined and well planned.
So now we have a few questions from the audience, the live audience here in the room. I'm going to read them one at a time. And I encourage you to, this question is for either of you or both of you. So the question is, what do people do during the day, considering that so many are not able to work and are living in conditions that are essentially just destroyed spaces? I ask because lack of activity is a form of trauma, and I want to know how people resist and cope.
You go, Hani, and I'll come in.
Either of you, please go ahead.
Yeah, so this is also, you remember, there is about 628,000 kids who have not gone to school in a year. That also causes other problems, not just for the kids that are robbed from growth and socializing activities, but also from their parents who feel like, these kids are not going anywhere, and they're basically everybody, the kids are looking for water all day, and dad is trying to find ways where they can get some food assistance. That's what the situation has been reduced to. There is not many jobs. There used to be a lot of businesses that they would sell things. There is not much to sell left, but people are just trying to start over, pick up the pieces, despite their losses. I have friends who open small restaurants, small shops, or trying to just find a business opportunity or internet cafe. But obviously the economy in Gaza shrunk by like 10-folds. So it is rather depressing. There is a lot of agony, not just airstrikes that are happening, famine conditions, and you're looking at kids who are amputated. The Palestinians are indeed resilient and steadfast, but then this is just overwhelming. This is stuff where history books are written about. And, if you can't, where would you go? One, two, like you don't have any money. You can't get money from the ATM. And a lot of people that the tekiya, the soup kitchen economy, a lot of stuff is happening there. And really, that's one of the things that we've seen when we started this soup kitchen is we hired a lot of people. We have 20, 30, 50 people now work for us. And they love this because it's not just a job, it's also a distraction, it's also a support group. It's also like, hey, I'm adding value to this. And the saddest thing is, I can't promise any of these staff safety. Israeli soldier could wake up bored, fight with their girlfriend or boyfriend, and then they just bomb the soup kitchen. And that really happens. We've had soup kitchens get bombed, 3 brothers get killed in an attack. And a lot of that is depressing. There is mental health counseling. UNRWA was trying to bring back the teachers. They did a campaign called Back to Learning, where it's in phases. But at the end, it's very grim. Like right now, it's stuck on cover situation, unfortunately. Suleiman.
Okay, thank you. Great question. And it's often the youngsters who get impacted most. Adults are often busy and young people are busy surviving. So looking for water, looking for food, and attempting to survive. For our part, and especially on the program that I manage, we've been providing psychosocial support for children from 12 to 18. And importantly, we also provide recreational activities under the same program. So in the past 6 months, we've worked in 71 shelters, and we provide a daily routine for children. So children come in and play, they paint, they draw, even though it's relatively impossible to secure basic stationery and art materials. We've been able to help over 30,000 children through recreational activities. So that's really important. And in the absence of formal schooling system, we're also setting up 55 temporary learning spaces, which will also give children a daily routine. But it's really important. I've worked in Gaza for the best part of 30 years on and off. And I build kindergartens in the West Bank and in Gaza. What takes me a year to do in the West Bank takes me about 4 months to do. We built a school last year, a kindergarten last year in Rafah, immediately before the war. And it was built in 4 months, and it was quite remarkable. And that's a reflection of the resilience and the ingenuity and the brilliance and the resilience of the people of Gaza. So they're survivors, and without wishing to see things with rose-tinted glasses, the impact of this war is going to be long-lasting, and already it's horrific. But people survive, and we need to support support people to survive, to reflect on the trauma, and build resilience for the future.
Quick follow-up on this, Suleiman. What happened to the school you built? What's its current?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's good. I mean, we know. I have the figures here. I keep forgetting, but essentially, much of the infrastructure in education infrastructure has gone. Something like 90% of all schools have been either destroyed or severely damaged. So in terms of the kindergartens, we work in preschool education primarily. We've supported the renovation of something like 15% of Gazan kindergartens, and we've constructed a handful. Fortunately, these have remained intact. And we have no news of one particular preschool which we finished, a kindergarten for 100 children, which was used as a shelter by many families. The play area, often it's very, very difficult for people to secure plots of land to pitch, their tents in which they can shelter. So one particular, the Rafah, the last kindergarten we built, was used as a shelter. And which was great. We hadn't even opened it for the kids. But because it's so close to the Philadelphia zone area in southern Gaza, we actually have no evidence of what happened to that particular school. But I'm really, really glad to have been part of an organization, a program to have constructed and rebuilt so many schools, because they've become people's shelters. And one particular shelter in Zawaida, which is a 2-story building supported by USAID, is currently home to 250,000 refugees. So many have been damaged. The ones that we built are largely intact.
Thank you. There's a question about hospitals, about the number of hospitals that are still active in Gaza, and the accessibility of medicines for children facing various diseases. It's a pretty general question, so anything that either of you want to contribute to that would be great. But maybe related to that is another more practical question, which is, which online appeals are best to donate to for food assistance and for medical? Now, I'm assuming the person who asked this already knows that they can contribute to UNRWA-USA and to ANERA, but they're presumably asking what other online appeals you recommend as also good to donate to for food assistance and for medical assistance.
I
The
can
work
tell
we've
you
done,
about the
excellent. Sorry,
Suleiman.
Hani, go.
So the UNRWA health clinics, there's 26 health clinics. I think maybe 6 of them or 8. It depends on wherever the military pops out. So there is about 6 health clinics operational for UNRWA. Sometimes there are 8 if Khan Yunis is not under bombardment. So those are really stepping up their game because there is very few hospitals that remain open. In North Gaza, where my family is, Kamal Adwan, Al-Auda, and the Indonesian hospital, they're partially functioning. The biggest issue is not just they were bombed. It's not that their computers were stolen, like in many hospitals where the IDF soldiers grabbed the computers and then the looters came in and grabbed the rest of the supplies of the hospital. And then it's not the lack of fuel, which is really the biggest problem, because now Israel only allow to, but the best of my understanding, Suleiman, is UNRWA distributes the fuel to the hospitals and to the bakeries. So that's one example where the Israelis say we hate UNRWA, but then it's like, oh, okay, now you can give the fuel. And that's really the biggest problem, because early on, when the genocide started, we were telling people like, hey, we need 50 trucks, 100 trucks, but it doesn't matter. You could bring 1,000 trucks, but there is no fuel to deliver. Doesn't matter how many trucks you bring out. So the health situation is decimal. I tell you this because the doctors are overwhelmed. The hospital, unless you're bleeding, they're not going to see you. So there is a breakout of skin diseases that people don't have the means to go to the hospital, and the doctors don't give that a priority. So there is a lot of small mom and pop health clinics that are emerging. Our family did one just for the last, we've been doing it for 3 weeks. And the surgeries the doctor is conducting in a tent-based clinic are just audacious. He's just taking a lot of risk, but if you don't take care of this, a lot of sharpeners extraction and things like that. But it is not a very good situation, and you do not want to be struggling with a heart disease or diabetes or even something basic like a blood pressure. So that causes a lot of problems. And I know ANERA does deliver a lot of medications for some of those clinics, and a lot of that gets to where it's needed. UNRWA works within its clinics, so the medications are given for free. There is never a charge. They see the doctor and all that. As far as the second part of the question is, so UNRWA USA is pretty steady about this, and ANERA's too. They have, ANERA got food to my family when, they had supplies. So this is where, about collaboration. And, but there's other shops, like when you talk about the healthcare, a group I like, PAMA, Palestinian American Medical Association, amazing Palestinian American doctors who want to do right by their community. And there's a lot of initiative. Go Project Hope, reach out to me on LinkedIn or something offline. I can give you some recommendations. But the one thing I can say about UNRWA USA, and that's,
If you wouldn't mind when you're done putting them in the chat, that would be great, because at least the people online will be able to get them, and we can get them to the people here as well.
Yes, absolutely. A shameless plug. You could go to GazaSoupKitchen.org and just learn. And honestly, don't do anything. Just look at the pictures and you will be inspired. We've hired 5 photographers that take award-winning photos and document the genocide. This is a big deal, folks. People still come and tell me, UNRWA, can I get access to these archives from 1948? We're building an archive now, and that's just, we're creating jobs and helping folks. That's just one initiative, GazaSoupKitchen.org. But to just state, so there's a lot of initiatives, but here is the biggest problem. A lot of these NGOs well-meaning, but the money is not being spent right away. So ask your charity, how soon can you get money to Gaza? And a lot of that is like, hey, they raise $1 million, they go around, hey, Suleiman, can you take my $1 million? Or like, there is a lot of that happening, musical chairs with your money. So make sure that they implement, ANERA implements, UNRWA implements. So just think about those things. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, briefly, Farid, only 7 out of the 36 hospitals are functioning in Gaza. ANERA has a program, medical donations program, where we get a lot of medical donations from Europe and the US primarily, and where we provide many health providers, including the Palestine Red Crescent Society, UNRWA, and the Ministry of Health, independent hospitals with vital medicine. So that's what we do on the health clinic, on the health side of things. But ANERA was really one of the largest agencies. We're providing 100,000 meals a day, which is by far one of the largest agencies cooking and distributing food. So please feel free to support us. But also there are many agencies who are doing other things. So in terms of food aid, the World Food Programme is a great agency. ANERA is also one. And there are others also I'm willing to recommend in due course.
Thank you. There is a question. So I hope if you have a little bit of time for us, we have a few more questions, not too many. We won't overburden you. I just want to be able to get these questions to you. There are many good ones. This question is to Hani. It's about, Hani, you emphasized that UNRWA is primarily staffed by Palestinian refugees themselves, rather than expats. Do you think, the question says, do you think that plays a part in why Israel seems to feel so comfortable attacking UNRWA staff and infrastructure? Do you think it might be different if UNRWA were largely staffed by expats? And connected to this is a second question, which is what measures of personal safety are really possible for aid workers in the face of these kinds of attacks?
Yeah, it's, I don't know. I just, we've seen, and I've talked to NPR about this, is folks don't treat the death of Ahmed and Fatma like they treat the death of John and, Brittany. That's reality that happened. People, all of a sudden, here is a quick example for you. When the American-Canadian health worker died or was killed by Israel, there was an outrage and the White House wanted to call and give condolences and all that. Guess what? The White House had no idea. There's a Palestinian American woman, pregnant Palestinian American woman that had been killed in Israel by Israel in November. And I had to go tell him, hey, by the way, there is a Palestinian American. Can you imagine like how clueless, like they wouldn't care. Like they've shown us, don't get me to talk about the political stuff because I feel so mad. Not only that they don't value the Palestinian lives over there, remember, they wouldn't even give a Palestinian speaker at the DNC. That's another tell you, they bring the families of the hostages, great, good for them, as they should, but they would not have a Palestinian American elected to talk about Palestine. This is how the little value they have. Of course, UNRWA coordinates everything twice a day. Scott, every day, the guy who runs the UNRWA program, every day, twice a day, he calls. Here is where we are. Here is the coordinates. Here is where the mission is going to deconflict. And with that, despite that, the convoys get attacked, school get bombed, and we lose staff. And I don't know. I don't want anybody to get hurt, but I imagine, there is a lot of people who have second nationality that have been killed in Gaza, that their government looked the other way. The U.S. government took 2 months to get the first Palestinian American out of Gaza, whereas the Israelis were like out in a heartbeat. They will tell you it's complicated. Everything about us is complicated. Aid is complicated. Look at the stupid pier they did. They spent $230 million to feed 500,000 people. UNRWA, like for a fraction of that, fed the entire Gaza Strip. But that's something that really I love hearing from somebody that Suleiman may like. I will not name his name. He said, counting Americans to do the right thing once they have tried everything else. And that's exactly what's happening in Gaza. I hope.
Okay, it's terribly unsafe for our colleagues, and there were 3 incidences where we lost colleagues in Gaza. The first loss was our colleague Musa, who was a logistics manager. He was attacked with a missile, he and his son, in his home. And even though the Israeli army had the coordinates and the apartment was deconflicted. The second instance was we lost colleagues from the World Central Kitchen, where their convoy was attacked, and which was obviously terribly sad and tragic. And recently, only last month, four security staff, young Palestinians who travel ahead of various food convoys to avoid looting, were attacked and killed in their car, which was immediately in front of a handful of trucks. It's not a coincidence that so many aid workers have been targeted, hundreds have been killed. It is a very, very dangerous place. And that's sadly part of, creating fear and anxiety is part and parcel of this conflict, and deliberate, if I may say so.
So a question that may seem now a little bit vague, but would actually, I think, is trying to get at understanding the situation maybe in a little more detail. It's about what type of civil order and civil administration exists in different parts of Gaza, if any, at this point. In other words, if there isn't active fighting in a particular area right now, yeah, how is life run? How is public order? Is there public order? And you may not have the answer to this question, but it's...
Look, Palestinians haven't had proper institutions for many decades, but we're a highly, highly developed civil society with fantastic grassroots organizations, community networks. Had it not been for family networks and interpersonal relationships and the numerous civil society organizations, I think society would collapse. This is, again, not to paint a rosy picture. There is chaos, there is mayhem in Gaza, there is looting, and there's a lot of insecurity. But by and large, people know each other. They're part of a large community, and there is solidarity amongst each other. And there's there's exploitation, of course. But by and large, Palestinians have largely survived without, the common institutions of a modern nation state. We do have a fantastic police force, which do a fantastic job. But in the context of war, things do not continue as they are, but we rely primarily on the goodwill of people and the community to maintain order and to help themselves.
So I think I'm going to treat this next question as our last question, unless somebody else wants to ask something. So there's one more question that is probably a good one for us to complete our discussion on. And it's a question that says, what if the killing, the genocide, were to stop now? What will be necessary in order to continue post-genocide? In other words, what would UNRWA and ANERA identify as immediately necessary for rebuilding and recuperation, especially in matters of infrastructure, lack of schools and nutrients for young children, displacement, trauma, etc. So if the fighting were to stop now, what do you imagine for both of your organizations will be the highest priorities to proceed with? And this is perhaps the most optimistic question we have had all evening. So we're going to end on an optimistic note.
Hani, do you want to come in, or shall I? Okay. This is a very good, very, very good question. And there's often so much talk, in preparing for this presentation and this discussion. I did some research around the effectiveness of aid and the priorities of aid and the historical legacy of aid. And often international development assistance centers around the propping up of the peace process, the so-called peace process. There's much thinking to be had around how best to move forward. I think critically, any support in the future for the Palestinians and the Palestinian government and institutions has to be preceded by a proper political settlement. The Palestinians received $40 billion in aid from 1994 to 2020, a tremendous amount of aid. Much of it is dedicated to institution building, but primarily to support the security of the Israelis in the West Bank and to maintain the status quo. We need to think outside the box, a terrible term, but we really need to think with fresh eyes in terms of how we move forward and what the priorities are. So in terms of my organization, I feel really comfortable with the fact that ANERA can come in and plug the gap and innovate with local partners in a respectful way. And I'll just give you one example, because it's such a positive program that actually I often, I've been in this sector for 30 years and there's not a single day that goes by without me questioning whether I should be in this sector, often because of the deep frustrations that we have in this sector. But I genuinely feel agencies such as ANERA and UNRWA provide that legitimacy for Palestinian refugees and their right of return, which is phenomenal, and that's why it's been attacked. ANERA is a fantastic institution in the sense it was set up by Arabs, Arab Americans, and Americans. There's a tremendous amount of goodwill, people who are in the diaspora who want to support Palestinian communities. So in terms of how we fit in, we come in and we innovate. We supported the development of the first preschool curriculum in Palestine. We've worked in 15% of the kindergartens in Palestine. The government doesn't have the capacity to support preschoolers. So 95% of all those children who are accessing pre-primary care and education are provided for by the private sector or the charitable sector. So we can come in. There's a tremendous amount of legitimacy around our role as an international organization. We're not creating dependency. We're not doing that. On the contrary, we're strengthening the local partner organization capacity. So we're doing that. But the key, just one last final point. There's a tremendous amount of goodwill, and there's a great discourse around what happens next. The key for me is that a tremendous fan to focus on the infrastructure, the rubble removal, the rebuilding of this. And I want to flag this up as well. I do not think it should be Arab states who should be footing the bill for this. There have been a tremendous amount of war crimes against individuals, and I think the Palestinians should be entitled to a reparation fund, and we should fight for justice, and we should fight to access funding that should be made available for those who've provided the weaponry, the horrific weaponry that's been used in this genocide. So I would love for us not to just focus on the infrastructure and the physical development, the redevelopment of Gaza, because the effects of the war on the civilian population will be long-lasting. We need to have a more holistic, a more inclusive approach. We should involve all of Palestinian society and all of their institutions, those that are democratically elected and those that are an integral part of civil society, and holistic and innovative approach to rebuilding Gaza and also rebuilding parts of the West Bank. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you. Suleiman, Hani, do you have something you want to add to that?
I hope by the time the bombs stop falling, I will not lose another sibling. I want to be able to see my parents and, see my nephews and nieces. I'm not as optimistic, to be honest with you. This has gone past the expiration date of any American intervention. This is about an Israeli government they're banking on a forever war situation, because if this ends, there's going to be shakeup in the government. And unfortunately, I want to be hopeful, but think of this example. Most of the schools have been turned into shelters, and there's really no more spaces left in Gaza that don't have rubble in them. I've seen our community in North Gaza take over an abandoned souk. an abandoned market. That was the only space available, and it has a shelter. And now on Sunday, they will launch a new school that will have 9 classrooms. It will educate 250 kids. This is a community-driven school that many agencies scratching their head. They're like, hey, how can we help? Can we help? A lot of the local community stepped up, and it cost us close to nothing to build this project. And starting Sunday, 250 kids will get education between the 1st and the 4th grade, and it's going to be accredited. This is really was driven by community, and it cost Suleiman, it cost $20,000. And by the time we open it, it might be $25,000. And we could do a second shift to make 250 more kids. Education is our religion. That's what the CEO of ANERA used to always say. And this is a community solution. Nobody from outside thought about it. We're like, hey, we have too many kids. They come to the soup kitchen and hang out and they don't study. We said, hey, how about we do a clinic? How about we do a school? And that's sort of like the Palestinian innovation. We have to really, it's wonderful that we do these things, but it's really sad that we must. You have to understand, like my brother who can't read or write should not be opening a school, but he is able to do it because he cares and he sees his kids hanging out in the streets, not learning. And without our education, we don't have anything as Palestinians. Our literacy rate is important. And that's what we want to try to keep that tradition. If everybody does in their neighborhood, like a lot of my Palestinian American here, you have soup kitchens, they run soup kitchens daily. And, maybe they can take the school every time we do this because we want to support each other. Not only the rebuilding of the buildings, but also the humans, the trauma that's compounded, that's going to live on forever with the old generations. It's going to cause issues. There is a lot of health issues that we don't know about that with these weapons and what they've been subjected to. So I just want to say, whatever it is, I ask everybody who's listening to center the Palestinian voices. Always center the Palestinian voices because the I statements are really important. And don't stop talking about this. This is not against any faith or religion. My boss is a Jewish woman married to a Moroccan man, and we marched together for the Jewish Voice for Peace, the largest one in history. And I want to tell people, like, try to get invested, educate yourself, educate others, because this is not going to end when the bombs stop falling, because God knows what the future holds for Gaza. And I just pray that you will continue to be invested and not check out once we hear about the ceasefire. Thank you.
Thank you, Hani. Thank you, Suleiman.
My pleasure. Can I just leave with one last final word, Farid, or possibly?
Of course.
Yeah. 2 things. Firstly, the current crisis didn't start on the 7th of October last year. This is part of a premeditated and a very sophisticated initiative to disappear the Palestinians. So we've got to make a concerted effort as an international community that seeks justice and peace to stop this ghastly campaign to disappear us. The second thing, Palestinian development really rests with the Palestinians. They're a remarkable community that have contributed to the development of many communities globally. And left to our own devices, without the bombs and the mayhem, we can progress like any other nation. Those are the 2 things I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you for joining us, for sharing your insights, your personal experiences, heartbreaking as they are, and the work that you do, the dedication of the work that you do is really moving and inspiring to us. Thank you to everybody in the audience here in the auditorium at University of San Diego, and thank you to the CSU San Bernardino for helping host the Zoom meeting, and thank you to everybody on the webinar who has joined us from wherever you are. Thank you all. Good night.